So let me get this straight. Israel can knock out intercontinental supersonic ballistic missiles in outer space, traveling faster than the speed of sound. They can blow the pants off of 3,000 terrorists living in a foreign country. For some reason, Israel can't figure out how to solve housing. Why?
It's time for disruption. Streaming now on tribejournal.org.
In 2019, 18.1 billion shekels were received for rental payments in Israel. 71% of those payments went to the top 30% of breadwinners. In other words, the top 30% of breadwinners collected more than 70% of rental income in 2019, according to a 2022 ADVA report. Most economists agree today that in a healthy economy, 30% of household expenditures should be spent on housing. According to an OECD report, more than half of the country, 54%, are spending more than 40% of their income on housing. So you think there's a housing shortage. Everyone complains that they need to produce more houses. But the reality is, there's a surplus of 85,000 housing units on the market that aren't selling. Some people will tell you it is the strong shekel and the weak dollar, but from 2023 to 2025, the exchange rate was above 3.5 shekels for every US dollar. So I will ask back at the end of 2025, why do we have an 85,000 unit surplus when so many people would love to buy their home? They have a down payment, yet the market seems frozen. Sales are down. Some 800 construction companies closed in 2025. In 2026, that number is already over 200 construction companies closed. We see IPOs and mergers and acquisitions happening left and right, urban renewal plans where they tear down 4-story, 5-story old buildings and build towers in their place. And yet we already have an 85,000 unit surplus. That's more than 3 years of supply, and they're building like crazy and nothing seems to be selling. All the while, the bottom 10% are paying more than 50% of their hard-earned money to rent. And according to OECD reports, 54% of the country are paying more than 40% of their income to housing costs. Economists agree that that number should be 30% for a healthy economy. Why? Because when you spend money on housing, you're not spending on other things. So if the cost of housing goes up beyond 50% or 40 or more percent, then those people, they have less expendable income to buy other things like toys for their kids, extra food for Shabbos, whatever it is. So this isn't even getting into the increase of rental income when people are forced to rent because they can't save. People are getting their rent increased by 20%, 30%, 50%. It is ridiculous. How did we get into this mess where we have more than 3 years of supplies? We are literally tearing down buildings and building more towers in the cities. And all this while people just want an affordable place to live that's not a shoebox. This is becoming beyond frustrating, and it's actually borderline extortion. So the question is why? How has Israeli housing policy shaped the crisis that we're in? Let's define the crisis. The crisis is not a lack of supply of housing in the Israeli housing market. We have a surplus of more than 85,000 and even more on the way. That's 3 years of supply. The crisis here is not about the supply of housing. It's the supply of affordable housing for the working class. Because right now, the builders are catering to the investor class. The reason why we have all of these houses on the market, one of the main reasons why we have a surplus is because a lot of the houses that are being built are not targeting the average working Israeli. They're targeting the investor class. Many of these people live abroad. Many of them live here in Israel. So today we're going to get into some of the contributing factors to why this problem exists in the housing market. Let's take each point one at a time. First, let's talk about the tax structure. When we wind the clock back to 1990, the Iron Curtain fell and there was a wave of immigration for that entire decade. Hundreds of thousands, close to 1 million, some say more, immigrated from the former USSR to Israel. In order to stimulate the economy without having to take on major national debt, the government pivoted from socialistic leanings. They made tax shelters that would help the private average mom and pop to buy a second home, to take on a second mortgage that would then be rented out to the incoming immigrants from the USSR. If a person has money in the market, when they cash out their investment, they have to pay at whatever their tax bracket is. Whereas in this new real estate tax benefit that was created in the 1990s, 5,654 shekels were tax-free. Back then it was less. They've adjusted it since then, obviously. We're more than 30 years later. But this creates a huge incentive for people to pull their money out of the market and start looking at real estate as an investment vehicle. Because if you can have income that's coming in that's completely tax-free, when normally you're taxed at, let's say, 30, 40, or 50% tax brackets. So this is literally tax-free money. Another option for investors is just to be taxed at 10% across the board. So forget about expenses. All income would be taxed at 10% across the board. This incentivizes people to pull their money out of the market and put it into housing. It stimulates the housing market. Now, that's all good and fine when you have 1 million immigrants coming in a decade. But when you fast forward to 2006, this was signed into law. Afterwards, the percentage of people in the top 20% of breadwinners who own multiple properties increased from 6.6% in 2007 to nearly 25% by 2019. So even today, investors are primary targets for builders who are doing either urban renewal projects or building new housing complexes. A lot of the housing today targets these investors, this investor class, in order to get them to purchase these apartments that they would then rent out. Another factor that we can't leave out, back in the day, the JNF raised significant capital, purchased significant land, and continues to have a share in the rights of these lands. This is worth an episode on its own for sure, but for now, let's get a basic overview. The Israel Land Authority controls more than 90% of the land in Israel. They release the land for specific purposes like apartments, new projects, new cities. But at the end of the day, they are the ones releasing the land pre-zoned, putting requests for proposals up to the builders to then bid for the contract to produce a pre-zoned or pretty much pre-zoned project in a particular area. This is an enormous thing as well. The country literally owns 90% of the land. They benefit literally from the sale of land and therefore are incentivized to squeeze the supply and not release that much land. And when they do release land, to hike up the price of every dunam. So if you could have a house on half a dunam, 500 square meters, or you could have an apartment building that shares 5 or 10 dunam and therefore dozens of apartments, the price per dunam will go up depending on how many apartments you're going to put on that dunam. Recently, they said no more houses, only duplexes, only townhouses, only split houses. So you can't build your own house anymore. That ship has sailed. It could come back. Let's see. There's a whole other aspect that's worthy of its own episode where the JNF and the World Zionist Organization actually benefit financially from the sale of this land. So you have Jews living outside of the land of Israel who are actually raising the budget through the sale of this land. And then with that money, they are, through the World Zionist Organization, sort of reallocating or having a say in how Israel spends the money. So you have Israeli taxpayers in 30 years of servitude who are forced to pay out the dunam, the cost per dunam of their house. And that money is now given over to people outside the land of Israel, in portion, not the entire thing, but in portion it's given over to people outside the land of Israel who then somehow are affecting programs and policy inside of Israel. Another factor that's driving up costs, or at least the surplus issue, is that cities are literally tearing down old buildings and building new ones. So this is happening left and right. And it's not just happening once or twice. We're seeing a major tick in housing urban renewal. The city benefits. Most people you'll ask, why is housing so expensive? They'll say, well, Israel needs to release more land. The more land released, the more supply for housing. That's true, but it's only partially true. In many cities, they're not relying on the Israel Land Authority to release the land. They have their own municipality, and they determine through partnerships with the investors and the builders, they're tearing down a lot of the buildings and building these towers in place. Jerusalem looks very different than it did 10 years ago. Same with Tel Aviv and all the other major cities. A lot of these projects are tearing down old and building the new, but they're adding 2, 3, 4, 5, sometimes even more times the amount of housing units available in that particular city. Of course, this is a natural evolution of a city, but when you have a major surplus in housing, that also contributes to how much other housing will be approved outside. The number of units in a surplus are in no way a good indicator of whether or not people who actually live here in Israel are able to buy. Another interesting aspect to this, these companies are raising billions and billions of shekels. In 2024-25, that number is over 140 billion shekels in both equity and unsecured bonds. These companies need cash in order to finish projects. And without sales, they need even more cash. So we're seeing a major shift happening, a lot of consolidation, and deals are going down. It's not really something your average consumer would be tuned into, but it's definitely something to watch if you're interested in this space. We would be foolish to leave out the permitting process. Israel is notorious for a terrible, long, drawn-out permitting process. The Prime Minister just invested significant capital to streamline a lot of these processes. We'll see where that ends up, hopefully in a good place where 2 to 3 years of permitting can get knocked down to within months, hopefully, with AI and other ways to streamline the permitting process. This is a good high-level overview, but let's talk practically about the cost of housing here in Eretz Yisrael. I produce films, investigative reports, documentaries. I have clients that I do work for. A lot of my work happens in the periphery, in the small towns in the Gaza envelope, in Judea, Samaria, up north in the northern border. So I get to meet a lot of interesting people and hear their stories and hear about all these different towns, a lot to do with the first response teams, different struggles that communities on the border face. I want to share a few stories of just practical, and this is again, concrete, practical building, meaning that how much does it really cost to build the actual house? I can't give the locations to these places, but I was in one place in the Gaza envelope, and they were going through a permitting process for 120 new units. I said, well, how much would a 200 square meter house cost? So the 200 square meter house, he said, would be 1.6 to 1.8 million shekels, which is crazy. 200 square meter house is enormous. That would be 7, 8 million shekels in Beit Shemesh. Anywhere in the country, not less than 3, 5. I think I would be very surprised if you could find 200 square meter house being built brand new for less than 3, 5, 4, 5. Some of the major construction companies, even in dangerous neighborhoods in Judea, Samaria, are not charging less than that. And here this guy was telling me that for 1.6, 1.8, with land of 500 square meters, with all the permits, and it would be 1.6, 1.8. I was absolutely blown away. Another example. And this one is in a place in Judea, Samaria, where the permitting process is extraordinarily different. He told me that he built with Jewish labor a 200 square meter house for 1.4 million shekels. So it was another data point that I keep hearing these numbers that are extraordinarily low. Now, again, that's not purchasing land, and it's not with all the Ishurim and everything like that. But when I sat down with one of the largest builders, and that type of a house would cost 4+ million shekels, that is an enormous markup. I mean, how expensive could that land and permitting process be? Some people throw around a benchmark of about 15% is for land. And here's the thing, 1/3 is going to the developer. Now, when you look at the developer has cost too. He has to find partners that are gonna help finance the project. That all cuts into his margin. But 1/3 of the cost of a person's house is probably going to that developer and his partners and his financial partners and backers. So when we talk about the cost of living here, there are some projects right now not too far from Jerusalem. They have permitting. They're over the infamous Green Line in Judea, Samaria. And they started out with like a 2 million shekel for a house. They've already hiked it up well above 3. It doesn't take long for every agent to hear there's a good deal. And then that creates the demand. And that's when they start hiking up the price. Now, again, I'm a capitalist. I'm not into government handouts, but is the system in which the housing industry operates fair for everybody? Or is it dominated by builders, financiers, and an investor class at the disadvantage of people who are not in the top 10, 20, or 30 percentile? I think the data clearly shows that. But when we look at these houses, these concrete houses, we see that this discrepancy is enormous, that the gap between what it actually costs to build the house, like 1.4, let's say, with Jewish labor, you're talking about that plus the land, plus the financing, plus the builder's cut, and so on and so forth. And the permitting process, it just goes skyrocketing. It's 4 times that price. And so this creates another whole discussion. Again, not everyone needs to live or can afford to live in a 200 square meter house. That's a big house. But the cost of housing may not be the issue. It may be the system in which the costs pile onto each other one at a time. Another important point in the actual construction costs is there's a polypath. The inside of the house is built on concrete with tiles, so it feels very solid. The material is about 20-year lifespan, oftentimes is built with a steel frame or wood. It feels like a solid house, and it comes in at a fraction of the cost, and it's put up in a fraction of the time. That 3-bedroom, right, 100 square meter house would only be, 200,000 shekels, 400,000 shekels. If you're putting it on blocks and whatnot, these types of houses can be very, very efficient in putting up housing for people that they would pay out of their own pocket. They don't necessarily need a loan even, it could be cash. And then of course there's modular housing. Modular housing, there's a lot of different options. Some of them are made of steel, some of them are made of wood. There's also the prefab that come in a box from China or wherever it is, or Turkey, and they come in and they're assembled in days, if not hours. There's a lot of different housing tech options that don't necessarily have the durability of concrete, but who knows what's going to be in 20 years. 20 years from now, we will likely be living in a very different world, and the housing tech is going to be through the roof. Will we have electrical lines? Will we have a need for water wells? Will we all have our own water well? Or will the air be able to provide enough water for each family just by turning on the faucet? There are so many different synthetic materials that might be created that are stronger than steel. We have no idea what's coming down the pipeline. And solar electricity or some other option could be a reality. So when we look at housing, say, in Beit Shemesh, in the old Beit Shemesh or the newer Beit Shemesh in Aleph, and we see these houses with, I'm like looking at my own place here, where we see these houses with old tiles, they need like 1 million shekels of renovation, and the renovation risks the integrity of the entire building. Trust me, I have stories for you if you want. And it always takes 2 or 3 times as long and 2 or 3 times as much money than you thought. We're dealing with that. That's 25 years after construction that people are doing these things. So when we look at the housing as a whole, we have to really rethink what is a rational solution to this problem. And I think that a lot of these housing solutions could provide quick solutions for people so that they don't need to put down enormous amounts for rent or for mortgage. Additionally, we don't know what AI is going to be bringing in the future. So will you have a job for the next 30 years? Is jobs going to be optional? Is there going to be a government subsidy? Will that subsidy cover your mortgage? These are major questions that my friends and I are dealing with. A lot of my friends are buying houses now, and one of the big questions is, will I have a job in 5 years? Are we going to be making money? What will the government subsidy? There's no communication from the government on this. So if you have a down payment now, that down payment is crucial in the future as rents go up. That down payment might get wiped out. But while you have the down payment, why would you sign up for a 30-year mortgage if you don't know how you're going to pay it? This creates a real conundrum. And some of these housing tech solutions can really provide a way forward for a lot of families, that they won't be reliant on a 30-year government handout because they can put the money into a house now. How long are we going to put a down payment and finance the purchase of a house over 30 years so builders and financiers, great-great-grandkids, can drive a Tesla, instead of taking that same down payment and buying a house with cash? So in conclusion, we have a tax structure that works for investors and hurts the lower income earners. We have the Israel Land Authority that doesn't seem to release land nearly fast enough for affordable housing. We have cities that are tearing down houses and rebuilding towers, increasing the supply of very expensive housing that the majority can't afford, and arguably the majority don't want because they're shoeboxes. And we still have a permitting and approval process that takes years and years and years, drives up financing costs for projects, and really hurts the policymakers in their ability to adjust the land releases and whatnot to meet current housing needs. So today in Israel, there's a major systemic issue, a lot of work to do. A lot of people are struggling. In the first quarter of 2026, we saw real unemployment soar to 16.8%. That's enormous. 1 out of every 6 working Israelis did not take home a paycheck. There is real financial strain on families, on parents. It impacts marriages. It impacts children's lives. There's real financial strain today. Housing has become a runaway train, totally detached from reality. And it's leaving the majority of Israelis behind. Even if you're one of the fortunate homeowners that can afford their mortgage, what about your kids? What about the children you're trying to marry off? Or maybe you're a teacher at a school and you get paid bupkis. Or a doctor who gave up 60 to 80% of his or her salary by moving to Israel. And now you're forced to live in a shoebox compared to what you'd be living in the States. Don't forget, 70,000 people made Aliyah, 50,000 people left in 2025. This issue is not going away until we address it. I'd like to invite people to stop venting and become activists. At the Tribe Group, we're identifying and investing in affordable housing options so that everyone can enjoy a world of abundance. If you're looking for a place to live, join us. We're building groups, we're negotiating terms with builders, and we're going to get this done. Let's flip the script. Let's turn the tables. Together as a community, we can make a difference. Join us at tribejournal.org. We have a survey for groups, people who are looking to buy and want to buy as a group. And we also have a petition for people who want to become activists. Just by signing the petition, you amplify our voice, you give us encouragement. If you'd like to join our team of activists, just click the activist button and we will be in touch. Thanks for joining us, friends. We'll see you next time as we continue to unpack housing in order to impact housing. All the best.
It's time for disruption. Streaming now on tribejournal.org.